I'm comfortable talking about money. I wasn't always so comfortable talking about money because I grew up in a household where we just didn't talk a lot about money. We had a lot of other topics, lively conversations in 2 languages, but money just wasn't always a topic that was circulated. There was not a lot of openness around it. We were also encouraged not to ask for anything. So we didn't talk a lot about money. We didn't ask for things, so it's only natural that I'd grow up to be a fundraiser. Those unwritten, unspoken, well-understood rules run pretty deep for some of us. Now, we also know that out there, at least when I grew up, a lot of kids wanted to be an astronaut or a fireman or maybe the president of the United States, a lawyer, a doctor, a dancer. Nobody grows up wanting to be a fundraiser. Well, it wasn't always that way that I was a fundraiser. Before becoming a fundraiser, I was a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Lobbyist, fundraiser, I don't know if I'm evolving or not. But that's just the trajectory, and I'll get back to those things in a minute. But I want to discuss right now, in America currently, there's a huge amount of discomfort talking about money. So when I said, can we talk about money, and everybody nodded, that's not really what we see out there. According to a recent survey done by Wells Fargo, they found that 82% of Americans want to keep money discussions private. Only 38% of US adults are comfortable discussing their bank account balances or financial plans with family members or close friends. This is a smaller percentage than those comfortable discussing their love lives, 47%, their weight, 71%, or their health, 81%. So there's a lot of silence and avoidance, even some denial out there when it comes to money. Also lies. 51% of those surveyed in a Chase Bank survey of Americans, 51% of Americans surveyed admitted to lying about money. And there's also fear. 56% of today's teenagers surveyed are already worried about money and their financial future. So if you have denial, dishonesty, and fear, why not add religion? I was brought up to believe that money was the root of all evil. As it turns out, that quote is actually a misquote. It comes from the Bible, Timothy 6, verse 10, and it says, the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. So the loving, the coveting of money, the treating it as not as a means to an end, but as an end itself is what's problematic. But a lot of distortions come when we add these traditional religions, and for me especially, and I know I'm not alone, the idea of being raised in certain ways really can contaminate our vision of money and how we use money and how we see it and whether we give or not. One of the really, for me, most egregious examples of this is something called the prosperity doctrine or prosperity gospel. The idea that's so American of think and grow rich has migrated into pray and grow rich. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about this, kind of in a morbid curiosity, if you will. So I went online, which is where we always go when we want these kinds of answers. And there's a treasure trove out there of scholarship and scripture. I use those terms really loosely about the prosperity gospel. And I just want to share one of the prayers with you. And if you're a deist and you feel like joining me in prayer, bow your heads and pray. Lord, I am in need of a financial breakthrough. I trust in your promises of provision. I ask that you open doors of opportunity and pour out blessings upon me, specifically according to my wishes. As I have completed good deeds, I ask for your blessings, and you in turn will provide according to your riches. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. Now, does that sound like a healthy relationship with a higher power? Or does it sound more akin to this? And we'll put it to music now.
Get out your announcements and look for the song, Santa Claus is coming to town. You don't have to stand up.
You better not cry. You better not cry.
You better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town.
He's making a list, think twice. Gonna find out who's naughty or nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake.
Oh, you better not shout.
You better not cry.
You better not pout.
I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. That was a real prayer, wasn't it? Yes. Thank you very much for indulging this song and this idea. But I ask you, is that the sound of inherent dignity and worth? More problematically, if you endorse the underpinnings of the prosperity gospel, it just naturally follows that the poor are poor because they are spiritually deficient. While personal failings may result in poverty, the prosperity gospel ignores the structural and historical problems that are the actual root causes of poverty. The prosperity doctrine places individual wealth over collective well-being as well. It also does nothing to mitigate the shock, the disappointment, and the anger that comes when the act of believing harder fails to eliminate poverty, when both personally and collectively. Unitarian Universalists want to help. They want to be in a good relationship with money and financial issues, and they also want to help everyone. And this is true very universally in America. The study by Charles Schwab that was recently conducted showed that nearly all Americans, 90%, want to align their values with how they use their money. So how do we do this out there in America today? Well, philanthropy is not a spiritual tradition, but it's a secular approach to do so. According to the annual Giving USA report, individuals, foundations, and corporations in the U.S. gave an estimated $557 billion to U.S. charities in 2023. Over and over, this report reveals that the United States ranks among the top 3 countries for charitable giving. So that's good news. Giving goes across all economic levels. And since we know that there's tremendous wealth in this country, what about that top level? What about the billionaires? Well, there's some good news there. There's something called the Giving Pledge. How many of you have ever heard of the Giving Pledge? Okay, some real knowledge out there. The Giving Pledge is a charitable campaign. It was begun by Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett to encourage wealthy people to contribute more than half of their wealth to philanthropic causes. As of June 2022, the pledge has 236 signatories. And those people who had made the pledge have given a total of $600 billion, all to not-for-profit causes. Which brings me to the nonprofit sector, where I've spent my entire career after a short stint with ABC Publishing. And having spent time there as both a program person as a lobbyist in DC, I have some reflections. I was working in Washington, DC for the Sierra Club on clean water and clean air issues. And we were having a pretty good year. There was a pretty big budget to do work in Washington and also across the country on clean air. And we had a big budget, and I sat down at one of our planning meetings and I raised the issue of, gosh, doing a lot of paid media here, a lot of traveling. Is there a way to kind of be a little more economical about this budget? Potentially, put some savings aside. And a colleague took me aside, I'll never forget this moment, and he said, "Listen, homie, it's only money and it's not even ours." The truth is that when there's a lot of money, there's a lot of carelessness. When it's easy come, easy go concept, it feels like it's going to have abundance flowing in. I think it's just human nature to think from time to time, not all the time, it's only money and it's not even ours. And as I worked longer and longer in the not-for-profit field as a program person and lobbyist, I hadn't even become a fundraiser at the time, I started feeling like from time to time there was kind of an enmeshed, sick relationship between not-for-profits and the donors. And we in the non-for-profit field were making our list, checking them twice, and then hoping that we hadn't been naughty, we'd actually been nice, and that Santa was going to shower down the blessings. And I became quite jaded. I'm still a little jaded. But I started to have some qualms about those giant donations that came from afar, and just how I felt like, when combined with politics, might add up to some special access. I felt like there was a pay-to-play scenario taking place where the biggest donors had the most muscle when it came to the political system. And the idea, I began to question the giving pledge, that would accrue to the public good automatically. I felt that that really needed to be examined. The worst case scenario here is that the representatives of people through our democratic process no longer make the decisions about the priorities, but the very, very wealthiest do. I think that's a bad transfer of power. What are the priorities of these benevolent billionaires? Their personal whims, disease eradication, vaccination eradication, football at universities, antique car museums, moving humanity to Mars? Which one of these pledging billionaires wants to support something socially good but not that sexy? Things like food stamps, housing aid, bridges and roads, sewer projects, water infrastructure, public schools, defense, the backlog of maintenance in our national parks. What happens when the billionaires don't come through? Or when they're really focused on something for a year or two and then they turn out to be fickle? And what if some of those who are being portrayed as philanthropic may not be philanthropic at all? Let's take one example, Elon Musk. Currently, the world's richest man. He's escaped billions in taxes by gifting Tesla stock to the Musk Foundation, which he set up in 2001. My estimation from some research, some great articles, well documented, shows that he's also gotten about $20 billion in tax financing or gifts outright. Well, his foundation gave away less than half of what's required to qualify for tax status anyway. And much of what he really did give went to employees, businesses, or projects that he is personally associated with. Musk is one of just 3 people who runs his $7 billion foundation. The director of the foundation reported, I can't believe someone will report this, but to devoting just 6 minutes a week to the job. And then came the elections. Elon Musk gave at least $200 million to Donald Trump's campaign. Now, in retrospect, my qualms about the giving pledge adding up to special access just seems quaint. I used to worry that there was a pay-to-play scheme, and now Elon Musk, as all of you know, he's going to direct a new department called DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. So you don't just get access, you might even get your own federal agency. Now, it remains to be seen how real or powerful DOGE will turn out to be. But Musk is certainly having fun. He's committed to having a leaderboard upon which Americans can post the most insanely dumb spending of your tax dollars. And he pledges the entertainment value will be epic. Elon is making a list and he's checking it twice. So here we are, America. It feels to me, after devoting a tremendous amount of my time, energy, and real love to raising money for credible local, national, and international causes, that we're in a real doom cycle here. Where do we go from here? I think we need to get wiser. I feel like we have to get back to the old ways. I think the spiritual traditions, the great thought leaders of the world, the wisdom traditions, if you will, have some of the answers. And I also think working together in this fellowship, we can work our way out of this in our own way. One tradition, wisdom tradition, I've taken real inspiration from is Judaism. And I learned what I learned from Morton Meyerson, who's a local philanthropist and a giver at the international level as well. Morton Meyerson taught me that the underpinnings of sound philanthropy needs to be the obligation to give while preserving the dignity of the recipient. And this, to me, is a magical equation. Jewish law has a tradition, it's called tzedakah, put together more than 2,500 years ago. And it means charity, originally the Jewish concept of giving to the less fortunate right here in your community. He taught me about the idea of leaving the four corners of a field unharvested so that people could come and get food of their own. These are the gleaners. And in the scriptures it says, and if you drop your fruit or nut, do not pick it up, but leave for those who glean. Now, in Catholic France, 300 years ago or more, they enshrined the concept of gleaning into law, and it still remains today. There are gleaning laws in France. I think it's fascinating that the Catholics of France took a Jewish tradition and enshrined it into law, and it's true. Meyerson told me that the gleaners originally would work at night to avoid showing that you're in need, and this, again, preserved the dignity of the recipient. In Buddhist terms, those collecting alms wear a broad-brimmed hat so that the giver doesn't see the receiver and the receiver doesn't see the giver. So I'd like to close with a few just very practical tips in terms of how we give and take. And I'm going to start with putting yourself in the shoes of this fellowship, so the receiver. I think it's really important that as we get monies, we avoid three things. Lois Van Leer and I, Lois, the former settled minister of this fellowship, and I had a discussion once, and she said, we don't do guilt. We're Unitarians, we don't do guilt, we don't do pressure, and we don't do shame. Good tips. Be careful of tying gifts to one single thing or the idea that we need to meet a budget. I think it's a way to step on the hose when you say, this is what we need. Sometimes, I'm doing some magical thinking of my own. You actually forestall the biggest gift that could take you to here when you're asking for this. So we need to be ambitious, but not so functional that we talk just about meeting budgets, because we have to do so much more. We need to avoid hoarding. We share the joy at our second and fifth Sundays, and these traditions are sound ones, and I think we ought to continue. I'm proud of them. Sharing today with Amelia's organization feels really good and right duty. Also, I think we got to keep it simple. Getting overly complicated with this whole philanthropy thing really stops you from just doing that feeling of abundance and giving that feels so natural. And we also need to be very careful about accepting or recognizing gifts into perpetuity, because things really change. Jeffrey Epstein once looked like a great philanthropist, and I'll just leave it at that. Advice to givers. Do your due diligence. It's best to give to something you really know. And again, that's an endorsement of giving to something you really belong to and you're active in. Sustain your giving, too. I think that fickleness factor can really break a worthy cause when they get a giant kind of massive gift and then all of a sudden they're high and dry and they just really didn't have the capacity to sustain that to begin with. Carefully look at finances. I tell people, give to something that you've kind of examined. And I would tell you, don't be overly impressed with seals of approval. You can get those pretty easily. I worked for a not-for-profit once. They had done their audit, as they were required to do, but it had been conducted by the spouse of the finance director, and the firm hadn't changed for 14 years. So, the seals of approval, you might need to look a little further than that. When you give, really let go. Avoid putting a massive number of strings on your gift. If you didn't trust the organization to carry out something worthy, why are you giving to begin with? Minimize your own requirements for recognition and hoop jumping. by the staff or the board of directors volunteers. And this is something that I want to leave you with, that I feel really strongly about, increasingly so, is consider a gift at your death. You may never be thanked. It may be a surprise. You could write your charity of choice into your will as an outright sum or a percentage of your estate. This is something in our fellowship that Peg and Pam and Dick Corbin are working on. And why do I say this? I think you need to think about your giving going on, and this is one way to make that happen. And also, one of the things that my sister, who's in medicine, has told me, there are no pockets. There is, in a shroud, there's no wallet when you leave this place. We used to tell my mom and grandmother and I always had this joke that she would say to her mother, "You can't take it with you." And my grandmother, her mom, would say, "Then I ain't going." But you're going. You're going, all of us. And I think all of us should remind ourselves from time to time that when we have enough, there is the obligation to give, and there is an obligation to honor the dignity of the recipient. And understanding when we have enough is magical in itself. I want to leave you with the words of Meister Eckhart, a German theologian, who said, "If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, that would be enough." Thank you.